Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National 911 Program State of 911 webinar. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session, and instructions will be given at that time. If anyone should require audio assistance during the conference, please press star then 0 to reach an operator. Today's conference is being recorded. I would now like to turn the call over to Brian Gibbon.
Hello, and welcome to the fourth installment of the State of 911 webinar series being presented by the National 911 Program. My name is Brian Gibbon, and I'm support for the program. This webinar series was designed to offer 911 stakeholders information about ongoing federal and state 911 and NG911 projects and provide real experiences and best practices from early adopters into the NG911 transition currently underway across the country. Like I mentioned before, this is the fourth installment of our bi-monthly series. Each webinar consists of a presentation from a federal level and a state level 911 stakeholder, with each being followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. At the end of the event, if there's time left over, we'll open up the floor again to all questions. Following the event, a recording of the presentation along with the slides will be posted to the National 911 Program's website, www.911.gov. You can also go there to find information on past and future events, as well as learn more about the National 911 Program. Finally, this event is being live captioned. The link to the live captioning can be found in the reminder email that went out to all registered participants about an hour ago. We will begin today's event with a presentation from New York City Police Department Assistant Chief Charles Dowd. Chief Dowd is a member of the FirstNet board and will be providing a FirstNet update. Following the Q&A with Chief Dowd, Mr. Patrick Lustig, the Director of Jackson County, Illinois 911, and Kenneth Smith, 911 Coordinator for William County, Illinois 911, will be presenting on the Counties of Southern Illinois Next Generation 911 project. Now I'd like to hand it off to Ms. Lori Flaherty, Coordinator for the National 911 Program, for an introduction of Chief Dowd.
Thanks, Brian. And welcome, everyone. On behalf of the 911 Program, it's my pleasure to introduce Assistant Chief Chuck Dowd, who is with the New York City Police Department. Chief Dowd is a 30-year veteran of the New York City Police Department and just received a promotion to Assistant Chief on April 26th, so congratulations to you, sir. Chief Dowd is currently the commanding officer of the New York City Police Department's Communication Division, which has more than 1,500 members and is arguably the largest, busiest 911 system in the country, with a police radio operation that dispatches about 4.5 million radio runs every year. Chief Dowd is a member and works very closely with numerous national organizations. He's testified before the FCC as well as Congress on a number of occasions and has been appointed as a member of the FirstNet Board of Directors, and it is in that capacity that he is with us today. So, Chief Dowd, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, Laurie, I want to thank you. I want to thank Brian. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to your group today. We got a busy 911 center here, and you know, the folks I'm sure that are on the phone understand the importance of 911 to emergency response. You can't get the job done without 911. And as we move from enhanced 911, E911, moving forward now towards next generation 911, it's going to be an interesting kind of confluence of technologies as we try to push that information out in a meaningful way to respond to first responders. If we could go to the next slide. Public safety. Obviously, for the last several years, we've clearly identified the need for improved technology. Just as one example, the NYPD has been reduced in uniform size from a high of about 42,000 uniform members in 2001. We're down to about 34,500 uniform members in the NYPD today. So, you know, one of the ways that you make up for that difference is by using technology as a force multiplier. As we in the NYPD started to look at, and by the way, I shouldn't just say the NYPD, as public safety in general started to look at emerging technologies, we realized the value of it initially for investigations. In other words, how do we push information out to detectives in the instance of the NYPD, the Police Commissioner Ray Kelly established in 2005 what's called the Real-Time Crime Center, which has revolutionized the way detectives conduct their investigations in the field by pushing information out very rapidly to them to aid them in conducting their investigation. And again, been a tremendous force multiplier in that regard. So looking further down the road, as a whole in public safety, we realized that, we just didn't want to get this information out just to detectives. We want to have the ability to rapidly deploy information in a meaningful way to first responders. That is, the uniformed officers, deputies, firefighters, EMS personnel. How do we get that information that they need or that they want to send to, back to hospitals or to command staff in a meaningful way? And it became readily apparent to us that, that this public safety, nationwide public safety broadband network was the ultimate solution for reliable information sharing, mission-critical information sharing inside public safety. Next slide, please. Most of these incidents, everybody that's on the phone is familiar with. 9/11, we learned tremendous lessons from that. Sandy, most recently the incident in Boston, all highlight the criticality of having mission-critical data capability for public safety. Just taking, for example, the Boston incident, having talked to some of the experts up there, recently had conversations with Terry Hall, the president of APCO, who was in the Boston area on other business at the time of that incident. It has become increasingly clear each time one of these incidents occur that just the ability to talk on land mobile radio is not going to be enough to get the job done. We need a mission-critical data network to support our land mobile radio capability and to be able to share information. So just for example, you had a mass casualty situation in Boston. How do you triage those folks quickly to understand and to get assistance from doctors at hospitals on who needs to be transported first and who can wait for an ambulance later? I mean, in incidents like that, it's crystal clear that you need a capability to reliably send data to hospitals, telemeds, in order for the hospitals to understand, number one, the patients that they're getting so that they can get ready for them, and again, also to prioritize who goes first. It's been well documented that, the commercial networks became very quickly inundated in the area of the marathon, and actually for quite an area around that. In my conversations with Terry Hall from APCO, he pointed out to me that he was 9 miles away from the incident, and they were having difficulty making cellular calls or sending text messages through the commercial networks, simply because the networks were inundated. There were initial reports that talked about difficulties with the networks, or that the police had shut the networks down. It simply was inaccurate information. It was simply the volume on the networks. Next slide, please. So public safety, this effort that we went through, 5-6-year effort to get this historic legislation passed through this, what was also a historic coalition of public safety under the Public Safety Alliance. Every police, fire, and EMS first response organization and agency in the country supported the effort, and we were successful getting the legislation passed, which created FirstNet. And again, why FirstNet? We want to make sure that on a nationwide architecture basis, that we get an overarching nationwide architecture that will ensure interoperability, or what I kind of more and more nowadays just refer to as simple nationwide operability. Interoperability kind of refers to linking disparate networks together. That's not what we're about here. We're about building a network that meets the requirements of public safety, but is, operable throughout the country, so that no matter where first responders ultimately go, their communications capability remains the same. And that's the goal here. It needs to be mission critical. It needs to be cost effective. It will be a tremendous force multiplier. And, you know, for this group, I'm going to talk a little bit now about the importance of the integration of this network with 911, currently E911, and of course next generation 911, which is just around the corner for every 911 center in this country. Interestingly, one of the reasons, next slide please. One of the reasons that we selected, or one of the many reasons that public safety selected LTE as the technology of choice for its mission-critical public safety network was, first of all, that, you know, it's an IP-based network. So it should integrate very well with next-generation 911 solutions. Now, why is that important? Let me give you just a couple of quick examples. Recently, there was it was very heavily covered here in the New York City area. I don't know if it got any national coverage, but there was an incident where one of our off-duty 911 call takers was on her way to work on a city bus on Staten Island. As she was sitting there, and other persons on the bus noticed this, there was an individual sitting on the other side who was moving stuff around in his knapsack. As he did that, they noticed the handle of a handgun in the bag as he was shifting his items around. He kind of noticed that they noticed, so he made a comment to the effect that, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's just for my personal protection. You don't have to worry about it." So here's a situation where next generation 911 will be critical, and I want to talk hypothetically. You know, after I tell you what actually happened, about how this will work, in my view, with next generation 911. So in this instance, the operator knew she couldn't make a phone call because the perpetrator, who was sitting on the other side of the bus, knew that several people had seen the gun, and he was alert to the fact that they might be calling 911 on him. He didn't get off the bus. He continued to ride on it. So casually, after a couple of minutes, that off-duty 911 call taker started texting to another 911 call taker who was off-duty, who she's very close with, and told her to call 911. So that other operator called 911, identified herself, and started passing information from the call taker that was on the bus through 911. They were able to identify, you know, where the bus was, its direction of flight, its direction of travel, I should say, where it was headed, and ultimately police were able to respond. They came onto the bus and were able to apprehend the perpetrator and place him under arrest. You know, that's the way we do it under today's technology. In the future, what I would envision in that scenario is that it would happen a little differently. Sure, she would try to, you know, casually, surreptitiously send text messages, but she should be able to do that, sending them to 911 and explaining directly to a 911 call taker or information receiver at that point what's going on, why she's texting the information rather than calling, and then not only should the 911 call taker that's receiving the information be able to act on it, but there's also there, if we integrate correctly with the public safety broadband network, with the FirstNet network, there should be an ability there to pass that information directly to responding units in real time so that they could actually see those texts and act on it as well, rather than getting it once, twice, or even 3 times removed, as is what happened in the incident that I described earlier to you. Another way that this will integrate into 911, and a classic example is a domestic violence incident. So ultimately, you would integrate your CAD system with your critical databases, and again, in the example of the NYPD, that would be our real-time crime center. You would be able to send certain pieces of information, or they would be able to officers would be able to access certain pieces of information that they simply can't access today. So again, in a domestic violence incident, we know from experience that many victims, once the police arrive, are very reluctant to cooperate with the police, and will even say that they didn't call in many cases. The ability to send that 911 audio or download that 911 audio, which would be related to the CAD incident from the 911 call, and send it in real time to the officers that are responding to the unit, and the ability for them to replay it, to listen to it, or to replay it for the victim, out in, let's say, for example, the police car, would be a huge advantage to understanding the incident they're involved in. Other information they could get in that situation, again, because they'd be linked to the databases through the computer-aided dispatch system, they could get information like how many domestic incident reports have happened at that location, how many times have the police been there before, how many times, have there been weapons involved, have there been prior arrests, is there a court order of protection that stipulates that the offender should not even be present at the location. All of that information could be available through this network. So, I think we're very excited about the opportunity here of linking or integrating 911 with the broadband network. Next slide, please. Okay, so now going back a little bit more to talking about the evolution of FirstNet. Again, public safety broadband network concept, 2006, 2007, 2008, the auction failed. I think from many people's perspectives, one of the reasons that the auction failed is it wasn't clear to everybody that this was going to be a mission-critical network. And we knew, based on the information that we were developing, that we wanted to be able to share with responding units as we developed these integrated analytical databases, that we needed a network that was going to be as important and as reliable as our land mobile radio networks are that we rely on so heavily today. 2009, the public safety community organized. Again, I mentioned that earlier. Really kind of a historic effort to get police, fire, and EMS all on the same page. OEMs, state CIOs, National Governors Association, U.S. Conference of Mayors, a whole host of groups, agencies, and organizations that got behind this effort and helped push it in Congress and ultimately resulted in the passage of within the Middle Class Tax Relief Act last year of the FirstNet spectrum assignment, the assignment of initially $2 billion in funding with the potential for $5 billion more, and of course, most importantly, 20 megahertz of spectrum available nationwide, which was critical to this effort. Next slide, please. So FirstNet's purpose, again, to provide first responders with a system that they know they can trust, something that they know and trust or can trust ultimately as well as or better than they trust their land mobile radio systems today. These networks have to be critical. Again, when we look at commercial networks, and this is not a criticism of them, they have a different mission, commercial networks. They are there to serve the public even during times of crisis like what happened in Boston or on 9/11. What we need is a network that's dedicated to public safety that will allow public safety to do its job and that they can trust that during critical events like that, they'll have availability. One of the frustrations I know on the part of the Boston Police Department and Boston Fire Department and their EMS was the simple fact that, trying to send something as simple as a text message or make a cell call became very problematic for them. They had to rely very heavily, and rightfully so, on their land mobile radio systems. I see there's a quote here, stolen from me by my good friend Chief Jeff Johnson from the fire departments. But, it is going to, kiddingly, it is going to be a tremendous force multiplier. The fact that, again, I mentioned earlier about the ability to send medical information from the scene of a mass casualty incident is going to be a tremendous advantage for emergency medical personnel. The ability for responding fire units to see building schematics in response to a multi-story building fire, and also to understand what types of items that are potentially dangerous, what's being stored, let's say in a warehouse, are there propane tanks, something else that could endanger them if the fire were to reach it. The ability to get that information in real time is going to help save lives. Next slide, please. So, FirstNet established, the congressional legislation established FirstNet. It gave us, again, I mentioned earlier, 20 megahertz of spectrum, $2 billion in funding with the potential for $5 billion more based on future auctions. And what we have is what I think is a very nice blend on the board of public safety, state and local representation, and commercial folks that have experience in building in these technologies. Again, talks about interoperability. I kind of like to refer to it nowadays as just seamless operability, but certainly the term interoperability also applies. Next slide, please. You know, there's been a lot of due diligence on this. NIPSTIC, NIST, the FCC, NTIA, SAFECOM, all have played important parts to this puzzle of supplying this information. NIST does a lot of work for us in looking at, you know, what the vendor community is doing. They're doing independent testing for us and sharing that data with us. We have a whole slew of requirements developed, and you know, that's just at the beginning. You know, that's going to continue. This is going to be a dynamic process. This technology will evolve as it goes forward. We need to constantly reevaluate the technology and the requirements and adjust them as we go. Next slide, please. So again, a dedicated public safety network. The ability for this network to reliably, on a mission-critical basis during the most critical incidents, to be able to supply information to our emergency responders. The applications capabilities that FirstNet is looking at, we want to ensure that, you know, applications are public safety appropriate. We want to have the flexibility to allow state and local first responder agencies to have their own applications. Some of them are homegrown, similar to some of the ones that we have here in the NYPD and other police and fire and EMS organizations have developed over time. We want to make sure that those play nice within the FirstNet network, and we want to share those technologies through FirstNet wherever we can. You know, the public safety community is not a competitive community. It's a non-competitive community, and we always very frequently share information and our thoughts and our experiences across this. I feel that FirstNet is really helpful in facilitating the sharing of that information on a nationwide basis, so that if, you know, Phoenix, Arizona is doing something really slick and new, you know, it would be great to be able to leverage that here in New York City or in Chicago or in rural North Dakota. You know, that's kind of the purpose of this network. It's, you know, just not to be able to share information in real time, but to be able to share information globally within the public safety community to make sure that, you know, if we're doing something well here, that everybody else knows about it. You know, if Boston needs help during their incident, if there's something we have that could help from Phoenix or from New York or from Chicago, how do we get that information to them reliably? One of the things that we've talked about many times is you look at the incident in Boston. You look at the bomb incident in Times Square years ago. You know, one of your fears always is, and we experienced it in Boston, there were secondary devices. Bomb squads have to respond. You know, they perform obviously a critical role at that juncture. You know, they may have to render a device safe, and in rendering that device safe, one of the things they can't do today that this network would readily facilitate is if they're running a high-definition video of their actions off of their robot in trying to render a device safe, they could be sharing that information with bomb squads across the country in real time. And if that device is familiar to, let's say, a bomb squad member in Denver, Colorado, that bomb squad member in Denver could actually supply information in real time to Boston in a hypothetical scenario in order to help them render that device safe. Next slide, please. One of the things that we're very interested in going forward is we have our early builders. A number of jurisdictions have received BTOP awards, and they will be working towards, and we will be working very closely with them to understand their experiences. We have some urban members in that. We have some rural members in that. We have some states that are doing this. it is going to be, I think, hugely advantageous to understand their experiences so that we can build the positives from those experiences into the larger build-out nationwide, and also to avoid any problems that they might encounter. What worked, what didn't work. So let's go with what works, and let's not try to reinvent the wheel from place to place. Let's leverage what we know works and move away from what we find out didn't work well. Next slide, please. Again, just kind of the things I just mentioned on this slide, talking about understanding what it is they learn, and we will learn from the early builders, the BTOP locations. We're currently in the process of negotiating through NTIA, because the BTOP program is an NTIA program, leases onto our spectrum so that they can move forward with their projects. And again, it's all about collaboration and engagement, which I think is a better word. We want to engage with these groups and others to understand what it is they learn, what it is they think they need, and make sure they get it, so that state and local public safety organizations understand that FirstNet's goal here is a nationwide architecture, but we want to give as much local influence and control over network deployment, network build, and network requirements as they feel they're comfortable with. This is not about FirstNet going in and saying, this is what you're going to get. This is about FirstNet going in and understanding, engaging with locals and understanding what it is they need through the states, understanding it and ensuring that they get what they need through this process. Next slide, please. Here are some dates that are available, which I'm sure we're prepared to share this with all the folks that are listening in today. We have one of our first efforts is going to be regional meetings, 6 regional meetings with the states, so that they can have members participate and understand where FirstNet is, and so that we can understand their requirements, engage with them, and move forward. We will also be doing, next slide please, we will also be doing individual state consultations or engagements. Again, I prefer the word engagement. We will be doing that as we move forward. That will be done through May and June as well. I believe the schedule is very aggressive. We don't have the individual state dates yet, but we're working on them, and it will be a very aggressive timetable. Again, having been involved in this collaborative effort for really 6 years now, I want to assure everybody that's listening that FirstNet's goal here is to ensure that public safety gets a network that they can rely on and that they can trust and will get the job done under the worst of circumstances. The experience of Sandy, I think, taught everybody in this process a great deal, and that is that commercial networks are built, quite frankly, to a different standard than public safety networks, and we need to build to public safety requirements for this broadband network. Again, during Sandy, the public safety networks here in New York City and the surrounding jurisdiction functioned well. They performed and they stayed up. I don't know of any public safety network that went down at all during the course of that in the New York metropolitan area. That's kudos to the folks that build those networks and support those networks. It was a great effort. It was also a good learning opportunity for FirstNet, because we had a number of board members come into New York City during Sandy, and for 3 days we had meetings with them, took them around, showed them, did site inspections, visited precincts, firehouses, and showed them the impact of that storm and what the difficulties were and what we thought were the ways to solve that solution potentially, just again from a local perspective. I can tell you they were very engaged, and again, I'm confident that the board has a good blend of state, local, public safety, federal partners, and commercial partners, and I'm confident that we're going to be able to get the job done as we move forward. I think we had one more slide. And again, just kind of reiterates what I was just talking about. A couple of key points. FirstNet is about public safety. That spectrum belongs to public safety. FirstNet is a caretaker for it and has the obligation to make sure that this network gets constructed, but that spectrum belongs to public. One of the other things you want to do is, and we don't have this list yet, but hopefully in the near future we'll be able to get it to you. You want to identify your state point of contacts. As a guy that comes from a large city, I've been stressing with the Major Cities Chiefs Associations, Metro Fire Chiefs, the Major County Sheriffs Association, that they want to get involved in the state process. The legislation dictates, at least initially, that state engagement or that public safety engagement happens through the states. But I would urge everybody, state, city, and local, to make sure that you get your voice is heard in that process, that you get engaged in that process, because it's going to be critical. If you have specialized needs where you are, you got to make sure you get involved with your state's process and be engaged and get that information into the state so that they understand what your requirements are, so that FirstNet can understand what your requirements are. Again, I want to thank you folks. I know I ran over a little bit, but I want to thank you for your time, and happy to answer questions if there are any out there.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press the star key and then the 1 key on your touch-tone telephone. If your question has been answered or you wish to remove yourself from the queue, please press the pound key. Again, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press star 1. And we do have a question from Rob Ehrlich.
Hey, Chief Tad. I've been following FirstNet very closely, and I'm very impressed with the work so far. One of the things I've noticed is that with 70 to 80% of fire and EMS personnel being volunteer, how are you taking into account within the FirstNet community and the interviews with states, which are typically with paid personnel, the needs of the volunteers out there in the United States?
Well, that's a great question, and I know that Jeff Johnson, Fire Chief on the board, and Kevin McGinnis are very concerned about that, and the rest of us, because we know that paid police and sheriffs have to work very closely with them. Look, this is the issue of funding and keeping costs down. From my personal perspective, is a critical part of this solution. We need to make sure that this network is built in a manner, and that the funding and the business mechanisms for the build out of this network have to take into account those types of situations. I mean, those agencies, they're running cake sales in order to buy equipment. We have to ensure that they get access to this network, just like a fire agency like the FDNY would get access to it. And I think one of the critical parts of this, a key to this puzzle, is going to be how we ensure that that spectrum. Again, the legislation allows us for secondary use of the spectrum. We can allow for secondary uses, including commercial use of the network, on a lower priority, and as long as public safety gets instantaneous access and preemptive priority on the network. In other words, that any secondary use is invisible to first responders, then I think we need to ensure that we maximize the value of that secondary spectrum, and we leverage it in order to absolutely minimize and eliminate as many costs as we possibly can for state and local organizations to put their people on these networks. Years ago we heard numbers of $50 or $80 per cop and firefighter to use a broadband network. That's just not going to work in my view. And so one of the major focuses of FirstNet is going to be, how do we keep those costs down dramatically?
Hi, this is Brian Gibbon. I think we have time for one more question before we move on to the next presentation. If you have more questions, if there's time at the end, we can open it back up, or you can email me after this presentation, and we'll reach out to Chief Dowd to get those questions answered. But I think we have time for one more question.
The next question comes from Jerry Eisner.
Hi, Chief. Thank you for your time. One of the slides said that NextGen 911 call audio was going to be carried on FirstNet.
Well, again, absolutely. So, I'm sorry, did you finish your question? You want to go further?
Well, I'm just wondering that is FirstNet going to be used as the infrastructure, the EZNet, for NextGen 911?
Well, you know, for certain capabilities it would be. So when I talk about 911 audio, what I'm talking about there is in our current state, in E911, virtually all our information comes in by telephone call. So the example I gave earlier of the domestic violence incident, I would like to see us build in a capability, and it doesn't have to be automatic. You know, the officers responding to the incident don't have to get an automatic download of that 911 audio, but if they deem it necessary in order to conduct their field investigation, they could, you know, download that audio so that they could listen to it, so that they could better understand the incident that they're responding to. That's kind of the thing I was referring to, Jerry, in that type of incident. Whether it would carry all of the audio is a different issue. I don't know at this point that we would be able to do that, but certainly we want to integrate with next generation 911.
Thank you.
All right. Again, this is Brian Given. I'd just like to thank Chief Dowd for taking the time out to talk with us. And if you have more questions, if there's time left at the end, again, we will be happy to take those questions. If not, we'll provide an email address at the end that we can pass those questions on to Chief Dowd and get those answered for you. So again, thank you, Chief Dowd. I'd like to hand the presentation back over to Ms. Flaherty to introduce Mr. Patrick Lustig and Kenneth Smith from the counties of Southern Illinois. Lauren?
Thanks, Brian. I'm really excited to be able to introduce these two folks to you who have really put together a project that I think is innovative and clearly a model for others to consider in moving forward. Our two speakers today, the first is Kenneth Smith, who is the 911 coordinator in Williamson County, Illinois, and the chairman of the Counties of Southern Illinois Executive Board, and Mr. Patrick Lustig, who is the director for Jackson County 911 in Illinois. He's also a member of the Counties of Southern Illinois Executive Board and the project manager for their NG911 project. The CSI is made up of 911 directors from 16 emergency telephone system boards within 15 counties in Southern Illinois who have organized through an intergovernment agreement to pursue a regional next generation 911 system. So without further ado, gentlemen, please proceed.
Thank you, Lori. This is Ken Smith. Pat asked me to present most of the information because I have a degree in broadcasting, but just because I'm doing the talking doesn't mean I did all the work. The most unique aspect of our project is regional cooperation. If you've been participating in this series of webinars, you know that most of the early adopters are states or urban areas that have the authority and the resources to do what they need to do. In King County, Washington, there's a statewide ESINet in place. They've got the financial resources and full-time specialists on staff. For my county, I am the GIS guy and I'm the IT guy, and the same is true for most of the members of CSI. Our population for 15 counties is 1/4 that of King County alone. In north central Texas, they've got a 13-county project underway, and they hired Kimball & Associates, experts in the fields, to help them. We had no consultant, and at one point asked our members if they wanted to chip in $10,000 each, and they said, no, let's do it ourselves. In Vermont, they have a statewide authority, and the same is true in Tennessee and Alabama, where they're working on statewide projects organized and funded by the state. In Illinois, the only state where the governors make the license plates, the state is not helping us, but they are pointing out all the reasons why we should not even do it. If you could switch to the map, please. As you can see from the slide, we are rural. We have about 12% of the land area of the state and about 3% of the population. We just heard from New York City, which reduced its manpower to 42,000 officers. Carbondale, our largest city, at 27,000, has 75 officers. 10 of our 15 members have populations under 20,000. The map shows the participating counties. We started with 5, Jackson, Williamson, Saline, Perry, and Union, quickly expanded to 8, and that explains why our data centers are so far south in relation to the rest of the members. Once we received our first federal grant, we doubled in size. Of those not included, 3 are sparsely populated rural counties that don't have enhanced 911, and the others were at one time members, but they dropped out for various reasons. They thought, one of them thought NG was still 15 years away. The counties themselves have no history of working together, but the 911 coordinators in our region do. We've been hosting joint training classes and cooperating and sharing information on issues for years. So when Pat first introduced the group to the concept of next generation, we recognized immediately that if we didn't get out in front of this issue, we would be left behind. We started the journey 7 years ago, knowing that a regional approach was our only hope. Next slide, please. So we asked ourselves, is there a chance for a statewide system? No. Were the standards finished? No. Do we have the money? No. Do we have an ESI net? No. Is our GIS ready? No. Is our system provider, Verizon, going to help us? No. In fact, their replacement actually intervened against us in our regulatory fight. So would the current regulations let us do it? The answer was no. So you're saying there's a chance. So we said, okay, let's do it. The alternative was doing nothing. Our state had no plans, our LEC had no plans, and if we tried to do it as individual systems, we wouldn't qualify for any grants. We would have been probably one of the very last areas of the country to get NG911, so the only solution was to do it as a region. Next slide, please. By approaching the issue on a regional basis, we hope to maximize cost efficiency, improve our ability to handle major events, and qualify for grants. Even if we each paid $400,000, which we didn't have for next generation technology, we still wouldn't have had connectivity to an ESI net. We have invested so far $800,000 collectively, including 3 years of prepaid maintenance, as leverage for what's turned out to be a nearly $6 million project. Instead of one isolated selective router, we now have 2 redundant data centers. Instead of 15 isolated 911 systems, most with single PSAPs and only 1 or 2 dispatchers working, we have a linked regional system with 21 PSAPs and 47 positions. Our region is in the New Madrid earthquake zone and is prone to tornadoes, so we've seen firsthand how quickly a rural 911 system can be overwhelmed by a severe storm or even a train derailment. When a train falls off the overpass onto an interstate, it doesn't take long before the 2 dispatchers are overwhelmed. 4 years ago today, in fact, a storm knocked out power lines and took roofs off of buildings across 3 counties. The selective router and PSAPs were inundated with calls, and if another derecho hit, we want to be better prepared. By connecting to our neighbors, we assure that no 911 call goes unanswered or gets a busy signal. 47 answering points in 2 data centers should make a difference. To me, that was one of the main reasons to approach this regionally. As a big bonus, we'll be able to take text, pictures, video, and crash notifications. But even if that technology is still a little bit farther away, just being able to back each other up is huge for us. Next slide, please. Illinois has no statewide 911 authority. The Illinois Commerce Commission regulates about 180 county and city emergency telephone system boards, and the ICC wanted us to form one big new ETSB, but the potential lack of control would have killed our project instantly. So in 2009, Pat incorporated CSI as a 501c3 nonprofit. We elected an executive board with Pat as the project manager, I as the chairman, Jana Fear as the secretary, and Tracy Felty as the treasurer. We were better organized, but still neither the ICC nor the LECs recognized us as an entity that they were required to deal with. The Illinois Intergovernmental Cooperation Act encouraged the exact type of cost sharing we were attempting, but we had to get special legislation passed creating an NG pilot project to get anyone to recognize us. Even then, it wasn't until we contracted with an alternate service provider 2 years later that we could get any information from the LECs. During the first half of our 7-year project, NINA was still working on standards for NextGen. So we were shooting at a moving target. That made it difficult to come up with an RFP, and we weren't sure what we needed or how much we could afford. The 911 coordinators were diligent about meeting at least once a month. Some of them had travel times of up to 5 hours round trip, so there was a big commitment to stay in the project. Keeping all the members educated on what was happening was a challenge because so often things changed every day. Next slide, please. The bigger challenge was that each coordinator answered to boards made up of police and fire chiefs and politicians. That's about 150 non-911 experts that we had to continually convince to stay the course and keep writing checks. Our project would end up saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars, but whenever we asked them for $200 for their share of an expense, still some of them balked. Pat and I burned up the highways herding cats for a while. It's a miracle we only lost 4 cats. 3 of them jumped ship the first time we asked for money, and that was after they committed to pay their share of the local match on the federal grant. Next slide, please. The third and perhaps largest obstacle for us was money. Southern Illinois is best known for high poverty and unemployment rates. The Clean Air Act closed nearly all of our coal mines, and the economy closed most of the factories and the prison and mental health center. With the decline in landline surcharge, only a few of the members had any surplus funds. It was also a real challenge to determine the fairest way to split the costs. Most we just divided by 15, but Pat's County has 4 PSAPs, while 10 others only have 1. Most of our PSAPs have 2 positions, but Saline County has 5, and the population varies from 8,000 to 63,000. 4 years into the project, the only grant money that was secured was a $600,000 grant from the Department of Justice. We eventually received more grant money, but we were deep into the project before most of that came through. We used the COPS grant for CPE equipment at the PSAPs. We used $100,000 from the Delta Development Commission for SIP phones and gateways at the PSAPs, but we still needed to equip the data centers and build out the network. The fourth obstacle was the ESINet to connect our PSAPs to each other and the data centers. You can see that on the screen. Clearwave, a local CLAC, had applied for BTOP money from the NTIA in round 1 of the stimulus program, but they were denied. In a stroke of luck, timing, or brilliance on our part, we partnered with them, actually thanks to our treasurer, Tracy Felty, who had a close relationship with them. The inclusion of an NG911 project helped separate them from similar projects in other states, so they got $31 million in federal grant money and $12 million in state match. They spent roughly $4 million to connect our PSAPs, and they offered us rock-bottom prices for broadband access. We're paying $250 per month per PSAP. We had been looking at spending twice that for DSL connectivity. The grant also included $1.2 million for hardware and software at the data centers, and we ended up spending quite a bit of that on session border controllers, which we had not anticipated, and also had an extra cost for SS7 equipment that wasn't originally included. So we had to come up with $400,000 in matching funds, and that's when the 3 counties dropped out because they didn't want to contribute $30,000 each. Next slide, please. Even though we had a commitment from Clearwave to build the ESINet, the grant allowed them 3 years to put fiber in the ground. We wanted to be up and running way before that. The weather was cooperative, but some local officials weren't. Some city councils balked at granting right-of-way, and one ETSB member had a financial interest in a competing broadband company, so he refused to let his PSAPs connect to the network. The regulatory delays ended up causing enough delay to make the build-out less of an issue, but the member ETSBs were constantly complaining that they didn't have fiber yet, or they didn't have their CPE installed. And once they had both, then they complained that they had to pay for both, even though the project had not yet been approved by the ICC. So dealing with the timing of the various pieces of the project was quite a headache over the last few years. Next slide, please. Once we knew how much money we had to spend, we were able to choose a vendor. We had originally put out an RFI and received a ton of proposals to look at. Most of them were 100 pages or more, and I admit I didn't read the ones that wanted to charge us $1 million a year upkeep. One offered just doing GIS work, and others only wanted to host the solution and provide the network. We had to better refine what we wanted and put out an RFP. That was years before the standards were completed, though. We cut the choices to 3, and after 3 months of demos and deliberations, we determined that all 3 options were more expensive than we could afford. So we put out a new RFP, limiting the scope of work and cutting out the bells and whistles. Only 2 proposals were affordable. We selected NG911 Inc. of Williamsburg, Iowa, mostly because they understood the regulatory battle we faced, and they were willing to fight it with us. The other wanted to sell us the hardware and software and walk away. So it was important to NG911 Inc. to show the rest of the country that NG would work in a rural regional setting. The fifth obstacle was that doing a regional project involved multiple LECs and CLECs. In hindsight, we probably shouldn't have included the 2 counties that have AT&T as their lead telco, and we would have just been dealing with Frontier. We also faced issues with crossing LATAs and shared exchanges with the non-CSI members, especially the ones that were part of our project and dropped out and are completely surrounded. So we also faced interconnections with the small LECs as well. For that challenge, we partnered with the Illinois Institute of Technology. Next slide, please. They wanted to get involved as a test bed for NG, and we needed their expertise. We spent just $65,000 in grant money and received probably 10 times that much value from their geniuses. Bureaucracy, of course, threatened to limit what the ITT could do for us. The attorneys got involved. So Barbara Kemp and Dave Staub, who had been brought in by Dr. Carol Davids of IT, formed Assure 911 so they could continue to partner in our project. They designed the network, set up the test plan, and configured and tested our session border controllers. I think this slide is one of the key things to our success up to this point, was the ability to partner with people that knew more than we did. The next obstacle that we faced, though, was to work on our GIS data. We actually identified and started working on that early because we needed to form a seamless map. Since NG routes on map data, it was essential that our data be in NENA compliance and accurate. We partnered with experts. This time, one of our members was working on his master's in GIS, so he worked out an arrangement with SIU Carbondale to use geography department students to perform hundreds of hours of work on our data. We spent only $80,000 for what would have cost us easily 3 times that to have it done commercially. William Barrett from the city of Marion and Melinda Woker, who's Pat's GIS staffer, have done tons of work for the CSI project without any additional pay. None of the rest of us have a GIS person, so each of the coordinators has been working constantly over the past 5 years to fine-tune our own map data to make sure that it'll work for NG routing. Also, as officers in NENA, Pat Lustig is the Illinois NENA president, and I'm regional vice president for Southern Illinois. We turned to NENA for help. CSI hired John Kelly, the NENA attorney, to help us, and Roger Hickson, Rick Jones, and Bob Cobb from NENA helped our project get recognition from the NG911 Partners program. Unfortunately, there were some in the industry that wanted to sell us expert help, and they didn't want NENA to help us too much. The NENA recognition did help us in our efforts to get grant money, though. NENA has also made strides with the FCC, getting them to recognize that something must be done to make NG possible nationwide. And we can still use their help with our final obstacle, which is regulation. The state and federal laws were written for the legacy copper network, served us well for 30 years, but they were not written for IP networks in mind, and certainly not with the possibility that a local ETSB or regional association might be able to serve as its own provider. We thought we could save a tremendous amount of money since we already owned the NG equipment to be our own service provider. We were able to get state legislation passed creating a mechanism for the regional pilot project and spend a year writing plans and testimony, paying attorney's fees, and answering data requests from the ICC staff and from Frontier and AT&T. AT&T has tried its hardest to stop our project, even though they only have a small presence in a couple of our counties. And finally, the ICC told us there's no way they're going to let us be the provider, no matter how much money we save by doing the work ourselves. So we had turned to Plan B. Our vendor, NG911 Inc., had been our partner in the ICC battles, but then they became our service provider. During the first year of hearings, they completed the certification process to be a provider. CEO Michael Ramsey, project manager Bart Lovett, their technician Travis Stender, and attorney Rick Hurd went from being vendors to partners and then to providers as the project developed. We have contracted with them to provide our NG call routing functionality, database services, and network security. They, along with Assure 911, have just completed the network arrangements for the first 3 counties. Next slide, please. NG911 Inc. had already set up their own team of vendors for the project. They used DataMaster for database services, Acme Packet for border controllers, Volberry for the mapping solution, Solacom for the 911 portion, and Higher Ground for the data recording. Negotiating a contract with them was difficult because their role was changing in our project from being our vendor and our partner to then being our service provider. So our CSI members had been told that they would pay less for NG because then they had been paying for legacy because we were going to be the provider. So when we were not allowed to be the provider, now we were going to have to pay NG, and that was really a tough sell for some of our member ETSBs. So in the meantime, the process continues with trying to get regulatory approval from the Illinois Commerce Commission. We ran into an issue where the phone companies would not give us any information until we had a signed contract with NG, and we couldn't sign a contract with NG until we knew how much it was going to cost, and we wouldn't know how much it cost until the phone companies started providing NG with cost information. Next slide, please. Okay, that's part of our cooperating partners, SIU Carbondale. Next slide, please. Okay. I won't go into great detail on the next few slides since you've probably seen them before, but we are doing everything by the book, meaning the NENA I3 standards playbook. We have all the NG functional elements installed at mirrored data centers located at the Jackson and Saline County Sheriff's Departments. Circuits from each carrier and central office are run to both centers, and there's both a direct fiber connection between the centers and a redundant system of rings in the event that either center goes down. We do have a couple of PSAPs isolated at the end of spurs, but we're looking at DSL options as a backup for those. Next slide, please. For the most part, our daily activity will remain unchanged. We're not one huge virtual PSAP where the regular calls are answered by first available dispatcher. Everyone will continue to answer their own calls, and the ESINet only becomes a factor when there's a heavy call load or a system goes down. The Solacom will recognize when there's no one logged in at a PSAP and use the call routing table to send it to the next one on the list. Almost always that's someone in the same system or in a neighboring system. Next slide, please. We are pleased with our network security, which has been tested extensively by IIT at their lab in Wheaton. They've simulated denial of service attacks and all kinds of failover scenarios, and the system was secure every time. If you ever get a chance to participate in any of the events the IIT has, they have a very impressive lab and are doing some great work there. Next slide, please. We will also continue to handle database management in the same manner as before, except that all the ALI records will be housed together and all the GIS data will be combined. Each coordinator will be able to look at each day's update and compare it to their own map data and report any inaccuracies for correction. One of the flaws in the current system, in my opinion, is that the LEC will load a new record if it's MSAG valid, regardless of whether or not there's actually a building at that address. We will validate every insert or change to make sure there's a corresponding address point, not just that the address the customer provided is within the road range. And I've tried to go a little faster than original to try to make up for lost time and keep us from going over, but we are available to answer questions. I'll let Pat step in and answer some also. Thank you.
Operator, do we have any questions?
Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1. And there appear to be, actually we did just get one question from Marty Posada.
Pisano, hi. Pat and Ken, a quick question. I applaud you for everything that you've been through and where you're going to end up. It's you guys have a great system. I wanted to know, though, when you roll those calls over to one of the other answering points, did your build, your network, also include a way for them to dispatch to tone out a neighboring fire department, or did this include radio connectivity also?
No radio connectivity at this time. However, those we have identified that, and through call handling agreements, we will have the ability to contact bordering agencies to dispatch public safety services.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
I am showing no further questions.
Hi, Ken. Thank you for your presentation, and thanks, Pat, for helping out. We had one question. You went through the challenges you faced and how you overcame them. If a state coordinator from another state or a group of counties from another state, either rural or urban, came to you and asked, what's the first step to take to become, to build out an NG system, what would you tell them?
I think most importantly is commitment. And I think, we're 7 years in this project, and and I can only applaud the other 911 directors and their 911 authorities, their emergency telephone system boards, for supporting and committing to the project. I think that's the most important. There are many, many issues, regulatory, in hindsight, obviously, the regulatory issues need to be taken care of, but most importantly, I think just the commitment.
Great, thank you.
And we did get another question on the phone line from Roger Hickson.
Hi, this is Roger Hickson. I'm the Technical Issues Director at NENA. I just wanted to comment that I've been involved with Ken and Pat and their cohorts for a long time on this, off and on. And I want to compliment them on their willpower. Pat was just talking about commitment, and that's, the similar thing, but they've really held in for a long time to try to accomplish what they want to accomplish and do it in a way that I think is probably the way of the future in the long range. When we get all these NG911 systems interconnected, we'll have a national structure here that really does a powerful job for emergency services in this country and even beyond, for that matter. Canada's doing similar work, clearly. So I just want to compliment on their willpower in pursuing this and keeping the faith, so to speak.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Again, in a minute, we'll show you some email addresses to send any additional questions on. We'll try to get answers for you. But again, thank you, Ken and Pat. Thank you, Chief Dowd. And thank all of you for attending today's presentation. We look forward to your participation in future State of 911 webinars. The next installment will be Wednesday, July 10th at noon Eastern, with a presentation from Christy Williams from the North Central Texas Council of Governments and a still to be determined federal 911 stakeholder. Registration for this event will open up in about a month. Again, for more information on the National 911 program or to view today's or past events, please visit our website at www.911.gov. And here are both Lori's email address, lori.flaherty@dot.gov, or send questions to ng911wg@bah.com, and we will forward your questions on to get answered as quick as we can. So again, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the conference for today. Again, thank you for your participation. You may all disconnect. Have a good day.